Thank you for joining Tech Talk with Dr. Fararif. This is our fourth episode of series, which is called Digital Transformation. And today we will be talking about retail industry, not only in Pakistan, but at the global level. So join me in welcoming my first guest, Professor Jonathan Reynolds. Welcome on board, Professor.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. Good afternoon to everybody.
All right, so Professor Jonathan is the Deputy Dean of Saïd Business School, representing University of Oxford. And as you know, I'm also from University of Cambridge, so this is our Oxbridge connection. I'm really happy that Professor Jonathan Reynolds has joined us. Professor, my first question to you is that how will the retail industry will emerge in the in our economies, which we say emerging economies, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19?
I think that's the $64,000 question. I think that the question to start with is really to what extent is the prospect for digital transformation in emerging retail markets different from the West? I think we can see already, less reliance on big, expensive legacy store networks and systems. We don't see the kind of big chains of multiple outlets that we have in the West, which are well established and have bigger risks and bigger challenges to face in transformation. Many emerging markets, I think, were already on the way to leapfrogging Western experience and jumping straight to digital. So we're already starting to see an acceleration of the growth of e-commerce in emerging markets, long before physical retailing in those markets had reached the levels of concentration and saw in most Western markets. And this is driven by mobile, it seems to me. So, for example, in 2020, McKinsey has been suggesting that half of Africans are expected to own a smartphone. And in the largest African economies, the suggestion is that e-commerce could soon account for 10% of retail sales. There's also a link, I think, between urbanization and retailing. And as emerging markets in some areas of the world continue to urbanize, so we see mobile urbanizing young people being the route to growth in e-commerce. So I think for retailers, COVID provides both a challenge and an opportunity for emerging markets. I think, first of all, it's a challenge in the sense that global supply chains are being disrupted. So in many markets that are in lockdown, businesses are closed, consumer demand is skewed and very volatile and unpredictable. And for both reasons, I think longer term economic prospects in such markets are much poorer than they were. So in Pakistan, for example, GDP is forecast to shrink by 1.5% next year. And who knows whether that figure will increase as the crisis continues. And we see savings ratios rising and so on. And in some markets, even governments are preventing online retailers offering all but essential goods. So it's quite difficult to actually see the full potential of e-commerce in those markets. So that's holding digital transformation back. But I think this crisis has to be seen also as an opportunity. It's an opportunity in the sense that emerging markets have always been characterized by creativity and agile innovation, perhaps in ways the West have not. I think it's a chance to experiment, to explore, to replace lost customers with new ones in new channels. And I was just thinking about Pakistan, and the lockdown in Pakistan has led to the growth of a number of retailers offering doorstep delivery of groceries and experimenting with this in Islamabad, in Karachi, in Lahore. And we see that in the West as well. But again, I think the agility and the innovation is really gratifying to see in all markets around the world.
Cool. So I'll take this point from here. So you're talking about that in the emerging economy context in particular, that with agility, with innovations, perhaps these markets can also do way better. So let me ask my second guest to join us. So our second guest is Mohammad Qasim. He is MD of Hush Puppies, and of course, Hush Puppies is a fashion brand, but it's a retail brand as well. So my question to you, Qasim, and I'm connecting Professor Jonathan's point to Qasim's, that we do understand that we were not, to a greater extent, we were not digitized. However, these days provide us a huge opportunity. So my question to Qasim is that how is retail digital transformation taking place in Pakistan? Over to Qasim. Yeah.
Firstly, thank you, Dr. Farah, for having me, and hello to everyone. Uh, uh, in general, I mean, if I talk about digital transformation in Pakistan, retailers are very far away from that. I mean, we're using e-commerce currently, but as far as omni-channel is concerned, or using data to get meaningful insights, we're far away from that. If I talk about digital landscape of Pakistan in general, we have a huge digital footprint, like Mr. Jonathan was saying. We have a population of around 200 million people, out of which 75% have access to cellular services. And as far as this 3G subscription is concerned, we have around 69 million subscribers. So that's really, the backbone and what's going to drive the digital transformation in Pakistan. And if I look at that in a retail context, it really, gives the opportunity to retailers to, serve their customers in the remotest of areas where maybe having a brick alone store would not have really made sense. And now, if I talk about, Hush Puppy's digital journey, we've been allocating a lot of our budget in the past couple of years towards digital marketing. But still, when you talk to Nielsen or you read the research, in Pakistan, traditional marketing is still the number one form, and people still prefer TV, and that's the most sort of effective medium as we speak. Uh, So if I talk about, for Hush Puppies, we've really focused on digital marketing, and, we have a huge presence on social media because we feel it gives us an opportunity to, have a direct relationship with our customers and to engage with them better and sort of serve them better. And as far as our e-commerce is, I'll just shed some light on that, some numbers on that. We started our e-commerce operations in 2015. Since then, we've had a growth of, on an average, a growth of 70% year on year. E-commerce is generally doing well. We're serving around 50 cities. We're delivering to 50 cities, but uh, but still, the major chunk of the sale is coming from the top 10 cities of Pakistan, leading cities like Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad, where we already have a strong retail presence. But so this is sort of reflecting that even in the previous years, the consumer behavior is changing, and a lot of old and new customers are actually now preferring to buy online rather than go to the stores. The challenge, I'll just sort of highlight a challenge over here. E-commerce generally is not a very high margin channel. So, and in Pakistan, consumers are not very comfortable using credit card or digital payments. So a lot of our deliveries are cash against delivery. If I look at the numbers, around 97 to 98% of our deliveries are cash against delivery. So this is a challenge that we have a lot of cancellations. We have a lot of returns because psychologically, I feel that the customer really doesn't feel that he's made the purchase because of this cash against delivery.
So the question that's coming in my mind now, that as you are saying that Pakistan market is not ready for digital transformation, and the major reason is that the consumer behavior is very different. They would like to go to the retail outlet and they would like to do shopping like that, and more importantly, they don't believe in credit card or in the digital payments. So the whole notion or the whole ecosystem then becomes very different. But then Pakistan is under a lockdown and people have to buy. And of course, as we understand, fashion products are not like compulsory products. but then they have some compulsory products as well. So, for example, food products. So they can't go down. They can't go out in the market, but they have to buy. So, in this context, Qasim, if you would like to give it a shot, so do you think that overall, if I look at the industry overall, the retail industry, was Pakistan prepared? And if Pakistan was not prepared, then perhaps what are the 2 steps that we just need to do? Yeah, over to you, Qasim.
I mean, I think the consumer behavior in Pakistan is also changing. It's not that, we are moving towards e-commerce, and e-commerce has been growing. But just to, answer your question as to whether the industry or the retail industry was prepared or not for this crisis, I don't think the industry in the world was prepared as such. And to sort of bring a little perspective to pre-COVID days, the retail, I mean, our government imposed a GST of 17% in the last budget, and that really hit the retail industry hard. I mean, if I look at the traffic numbers industry-wide, we've had a dip of traffic of around 20%. So, I mean, and when I talk to Eastern wear retailers, they're struggling to make full price sales at the moment. And another important thing to sort of realize is that this whole crisis came at a very wrong time for Pakistan and globally, because this was essentially like, in Pakistan, we went into lockdown on 22nd of March. This was the time for lawn season, which is, for Eastern wear, one of the biggest seasons. And for other brands, this was the time for the spring summer launches. And in 20 odd days, we have Eid, which is again the biggest, one of the biggest festivals or the seasons we have. So, and all of this is now disrupted. So this leaves a big challenge for retailers with, all the inventories they've been carrying. They were preparing for this season. So they left with all this inventory. And my fear is that, maybe a lot of brands will not survive this crisis, and there'll be a big impact on the whole supply chain.
I think you're muted, Farah.
Yeah, Thank you for informing me. Yeah. So my question to Professor Jonathan is that, as Qasim was also saying, that there's a lot of disruption coming up, especially supply chain is disrupted. So a lot of people are also suggesting that post-COVID-19 will be a new normal. So what is your take on it? Yeah.
I think that phrase, the new normal, is becoming a rather overused phrase, and we're hearing it a lot in relation to this. I've heard McKinsey talk about the next normal. I quite like the notion, as others have coined this, as a before COVID and after COVID world, BCAC. But let's stick with this new normal phraseology, because I think the new normal in many markets is going to be about the greater use of online. As I think you were suggesting, as those in lockdown gain more experience of using mobile technology. In many ways, if you like, it's accelerated the digital future. It's brought that digital future forward. And we see evidence for that around the world. We see the growth in app downloads, for example, as consumers adjust lifestyles. A recent survey showed that about 45% growth in the first quarter of 2020 in app downloads, not just in retail, but in gaming, entertainment, as people try to find ways of keeping themselves busy under lockdown. But will this persist? Will we slip back? In the West, I think there have been real distribution challenges as online-only operators have been completely swamped with demand from those at home, particularly in grocery and essential goods. And omni-channel retailers, and there are many of them in, for example, the UK market, have been really completely unable to scale as fast as they needed to without adding very significant costs to their profit and loss account. As Qasim says, e-commerce is extremely costly. for those kinds of retailers. And I think just reading the commentary that's coming in at the moment, someone talking about food security and globalization. And I think, the new normal world is going to be less global in many respects, and that will have a big impact on the retail sector in every marketplace. Those retailers with very extended supply chains will have difficulty in getting back to the old normal, given the fragmented state of markets. And I think we'll start to see much greater reliance on offshoring and on self-sufficiency where that's possible. So I think the jury is out on whether there's a kind of snap back to the old way of doing things. There is a sense in which certainly in many markets, consumers are reluctant, even if lockdown is lifted, to go back to the old normal because they're fearful of catching the virus, they're fearful of being too close to other people and so on. And perhaps they're learning new skills that they wouldn't otherwise have had. At the same time, fulfilling that increased demand is becoming increasingly costly, I think, for retailers, and carving out of already quite low margins for many companies. So it's an interesting balancing act, I think.
All right. So my question then to Qasim. So Qasim, as Professor Jonathan is saying, things might be very different. It might be more expensive. So how do you see all these things coming along here in Pakistan?
I mean, talking about the new normal in Pakistan, I think it's extremely difficult to, say or predict what the new normal would be. We can only sort of look at global trends and forecasts and what's happening in other countries to sort of, determine what's going to happen in Pakistan. I was reading a report from McKinsey, their State of Fashion 2020 report, which is now updated, and they have the Corona virus update to it. So their forecast in the coming year, their forecast is basically that fashion category will go down by 30% in 2020. And even in 2021, their forecast is a growth of 3 to 4%. So essentially that means that, getting back to the 2019 level will be extremely hard and will take a long time. When I talk to Hush Puppies licensees in China, currently they've got 90% of their stores open, but the traffic is down 60%. So like Mr. Jonathan was saying, that even when the stores open, you don't know if the consumers or the customers will actually come to the stores or not. If you look at Dubai, they've got their shopping malls open now, but they've imposed very hard SOPs. And one of the SOPs they have is that any store can only have 30% of their total capacity of people in the store at any given time. So I mean, obviously that's going to affect sales. And I think in Pakistan also we'll probably have similar SOPs when we do open. So I mean to say, so I feel in the new normal, the brick and mortar stores will really struggle. And on the other hand, I was reading a report by Nielsen. They say grocery shopping is up 30%. 30% more people are buying groceries online, and even fashion category spending online is up 20%.
So this is very interesting. So my question now to Professor Jonathan: Pakistani retailer is like kind of fixated to this brick and mortar, and for the obvious reasons, because digital transformation didn't happen in that way in this part of the world. Yeah. So how will these retailers, how can these retailers evolve there? Because their DNA is fixated to brick and mortar. So what would be your advice to the Pakistani retailer, and of course to the mandatory things, which is medicine, food items, and to the kind of luxury items where we have the fashion brands and clothing? Over to you, Professor.
Okay, I think I'm just picking up also one of the comments on the live chat, which says, traditional ways of buying is mostly preferred by a huge number of people over here in Pakistan. Is it going to change by the end of this pandemic? So, what should a retailer in Pakistan do? And as Qasim says, the sectoral impact is very different food, non-food, essential, non-essential, clothing, apparel, as against groceries. I think the general advice, of course, is, as always, to focus on the customer. Encourage the retailer to understand their customer base rather than a knee-jerk reaction to say, we must move online. I think one of the prime differentiators of the emerging market retailer, particularly the local independent, is that they know their customers intimately. They know their local customers. Can they replicate this online? It's quite challenging to do that. And we know also that it's younger customers who are embracing mobile internet particularly. I think that's also the case in Pakistan. We've already heard reference to payment. And I think the dominance of cash payments psychology in many emerging markets, not just emerging markets, in Germany, for example, we see reluctance to use online payments is holding back some of that transformation. Then we think about logistics. Where do logistics sit? Shoppers, if you go online, will increasingly rate your services based on price and convenience. And if there is a problem with the home delivery or the fulfillment aspects of your online operation, you'll very quickly get the blame for that. The question would be around, do you use your own logistics, third-party logistics that you may have less control over? Because the worst thing you want are kind of long or unreliable delivery times. I think the other thing I talk about also is platforms. I think we clearly have in Pakistan, a big dominant platform model in the form of Bazaar. We see a lot of that similarly in other markets. Our research certainly suggests that one should be a little careful about platforms. The research is starting to show that there is a challenge. Supplier brands can often get lost and margins get squeezed even more than they would otherwise do with a platform intermediary. Platforms indeed may actually reduce the potential to build loyalty in certain cases. And then, of course, as Qasim has mentioned, the store, what future for the store? I firmly believe that the store will continue to play a role for retailers in every market, and now and into the future. And we have to focus on what stores do best. I agree also, though, that in the interim period with social distancing, it's going to be quite challenging for stores that are affected by those kinds of regulations or guidelines to trade as profitably and as successfully as they used to be able to. So again, it comes back to saying, being adaptable, being agile, and perhaps hedging your bets across particular channels. Should your customer base be receptive to that kind of move? That would be my kind of 2 minutes of suggestions.
All right, cool. Again, the same question to Qasim. So how do you think that what are the challenges, for Pakistani retailer, and how then they can take their baby steps towards this digital transformation, because that's what they need to do, partially at least. Over to Qasim.
So I think the challenge, what we need to focus is on, store efficiency, because like Jonathan was saying that, margins will go down. So we need to have, lean operations. And even in terms of inventory management, we need to, sort of have lean inventory. We're currently working with a data startup to, improve our demand forecasting and product affinity to sort of plan these inventories better. I think going forward, obviously, omni-channel is key. What I'm very optimistic about, or I think, what play a key role in the future is order online and pick up from stores. So that way, the customer doesn't really have to spend a lot of time at the store, and he can just order online and walk into the store, just make sure he's got the right fit, and, he likes the product, and he can just walk out. So I think going forward, that will play a key role. We're working aggressively, we've upped our technology budget, and we're working aggressively with our technology partner to become the first omni-channel retailer in Pakistan.
All right, so let me take now a few questions from our Facebook comments. So here is like one of the questions. So keeping the fact in mind that a number of people here in Pakistan are not fully aware of the technology itself. So I think the question is that if they are not aware of technology, how will we then be selling to them? That's a challenge. Over to Professor Jonathan. Yeah.
Well, I mean that's the fundamental challenge, isn't it? Because if no one knows about the technology or is unwilling to use it, then you haven't even got to the first base. We saw this certainly in many markets as people started to adopt new technology. And what we found most useful in encouraging growth in that was word of mouth effects. So people aren't going to try something unless one of their friends or one of their sort of trusted family members has actually done it for themselves. So there is a kind of viral, if I can use the word, effect in terms of adoption of new technology, just as there is the virus that we're dealing with in health conditions, which actually means we need a kind of spread of information about these sorts of technologies. We need people to talk them up, and just as we're doing on this particular webcast, to say actually that there are these technologies available, that they may make your lives easier. These are the prerequisites. These are things you have to learn. And in Western markets also, we had similar challenges in terms of increasing adoption, because people were suspicious. They were saying, well, it will never arrive on time. There'll be a missing item in the inventory when it is delivered. It's overpriced online. I don't want to pay the delivery charge. So the role of the retailer is to reduce these kinds of barriers to adoption. And we heard Qasim talk about pick up from store. Click and collect is a great halfway house where you say, well, having ordered online, you then go to the more familiar kind of venue to pick up. But sometimes it's also the technology that we're using is not so different from direct selling. And we know that in Pakistan, households do already have experience of direct selling. So it's not so different in terms of the process. It's simply that the mechanism is rather different.
Yeah, no, I agree. So Qasim, as we are talking about, the technology, so people are not aware of technology. So can you share us any insights? Because you guys have, of course, you guys had to run the show, so you guys have jumped into technology as well. So can you share any intervention that you guys brought in just last 1 month or so to encourage your sales online? Over to you, Qasim.
So I think generally, consumers are adapting to to new technologies. Like last week, my mother was ordering groceries online, which she's never done before. And talk about it from a brand's perspective. Brands are ensuring different ways where people can call in and order, maybe through WhatsApp. They're trying to facilitate people, consumers, in different way to make it easy for them to sort of order, to place orders.
Right. I have a very interesting question over here. Professor Najm is one of he's a professor of supply chain and entrepreneurship in one of the leading business schools here in Pakistan, IBA Karachi. And so he is asking this question to both of you. So what is going to be a typical post-corona consumer in the emerging market? Over to you, Professor Jonathan.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And if we knew the answer to that, we'd be making our investments accordingly. But my sense is that there are kind of a number of possibilities. On release from lockdown, perhaps many consumers will be just so delighted to get out. And there's another comment on the live chat saying, well, actually, in Pakistan, the mall culture is flourishing. People love to go outside, and shopping for them in a fun-loving activity. Perhaps that will be the new consumer. They will bounce back to the old behavior. On the other hand, I also see markets where in lockdown, people are very, very cautious and reluctant to go back to business as usual. In the UK, for example, we've seen a real change from much more frequent daily shopping for food, which is happening over the last few years, to going back to big weekly or fortnightly food shops, because that's seen as being safer. We may see different demographies behaving differently, different lifestyles behaving differently as well. So I don't think we can say there's one answer to the coronavirus, post-coronavirus consumer. I think we may see different lifestyle responses. Perhaps younger people, less vulnerable to the virus, may well feel more confident in going out. Older, more vulnerable people may permanently change their behavior because they feel really vulnerable and exposed to the threat of infection and to social interaction.
Qasim, what was your experience over the last 1 month? So do you see, any attribute of your current market? How are they changing? Yeah.
I think talking about post, it's difficult to say, what the post Corona world will be. But a survey by Nielsen was showing that, in Pakistan, we're very optimistic, and 8 out of 10 people think that, this will go away very soon. So I think So I'm optimistic in that sense that once lockdown ends, we will have people coming out. I was looking. I mean, I was talking to someone and he was telling me that lockdown in Azad Kashmir has ended, and people have really come out to shop and because like Jonathan was saying, like people are fed up of staying inside, and this is the only sort of entertainment people have as well, going to the malls or to the stores and to shop.
So you are reminding me like some $1 million sale of Hermes in China. So that's going to happen in Pakistan as well. So Qasim was like,
we can only hope that will happen. Yes,
that can happen.
But the important thing is obviously customer safety. So no matter what happens, we have to make sure that even when the stores open, we make sure that our employees are safe, and obviously the customer is safe as well.
It's very instructive to look at China, for example, and because that's one of the earliest markets to come out of lockdown. We can see there that consumers are very reluctant to go into restaurants, for example, but they are happy to go into food stores and around there, to the extent that actually the government is thinking is having shopping festivals in certain cities to try and encourage people back into the centres and malls.
I agree. We have another interesting question over here. That so how can so you are also talking about that the customer will change. Qasim is also talking about it, but then there is another question: how can I get these insights? So, any tip from you guys? How can we know these things?
Well, I mean, that one advantage of e-commerce is that the data collection is very good. And again, someone else on the chat is saying, well, if I get the one marketing opportunity for retail businesses will be the customer data. Because that will actually allow us to track some of this. So in some senses, some of the platform businesses, some of the e-commerce businesses have an advantage because they can track in real time changing buying behavior in relation to certain products. Of course, local independent retailers have been doing that for generations. So again, as I go back to my earlier point, local businesses know their customer base. They know, if they're able to trade, at least how their customers are changing in terms of their requirements. But not being able to trade, you're in the dark about what's going to happen after coronavirus. So the data is pretty critical, and we're seeing a lot of new kinds of data coming through, Google Trends data and some of the mobile community monitoring and so on, to understand what the downturn in mobility actually is in different markets and so on. But I think your questioner is right that actually that's pretty critical to tracking what behavior is changing and where it is changing. And I think it's going to be much more complex than a simple singular change in behavior. I think we'll see a lot of different responses.
I agree, and perhaps then there is a room for data analytics as well. So now we need to go into the deeper layers of our data. So perhaps if we were not using it previously, now it is very critical, because we have to be, as you said, Professor Jonathan, we need to be agile and very innovative. There's another perspective aspect of it. So we were just talking about B2C market, but then there is a huge B2B market. So how do you see how this B2B market will change, Professor Jonathan?
Now that's an interesting one, because again, I go back to my earlier answers around supply chains and the role of some of the business-to-business interactions. Again, in some markets, we've seen business-to-business interactions dry up. So, for example, catering and hospitality sector have been very, very badly affected by this in many, many markets, to the extent that the businesses supplying them have had to look for other sources of customer revenue. So, for example, in my local area, the local egg producer that used to rely on supplying Oxford colleges has not been able to supply those colleges because all our students have gone home. So they've had to reorient themselves around new sources of custom. So again, I think this is not just a challenge for B2C businesses, it's a challenge for B2B businesses, as their traditional sources of custom either are closed or will change their sourcing practices. And that's almost a hidden part of the impact of coronavirus. I think we hear a lot about retailing, we hear a lot about customer behavior at the consumer end. We don't necessarily hear as much about the some of the intermediate agents in the value chain, the wholesalers, the distributors, the business-to-business operations. And I think there are some really big hidden impacts that we need to understand better, and perhaps understand possible responses.
True. And just to connect Professor Johnson's comment here to you, Qasim, because you are running a business and your business is across the country. And of course, there are some intermediaries and there is a whole good supply chain. So can you share with us a couple of challenges that you guys have recently faced, or perhaps a month or 1.5 months is not that a long period to see that challenge? Over to you, Qasim.
I mean, if we talk about supply chain, I think, firstly, I think globalization as we know it, it might be the end of that. A lot of brands would, even globally would want to source products locally. And this is more so true in Pakistan because we already have a very high import duty of 67%. So I think going forward, brands that are vertically integrated will have an advantage. And I just want to comment on the previous question. The challenge us brands have that in Pakistan, 80% of the retail market is informal and only 20% is formal. So we don't really have access to correct data or to understand the customer better. We just have to rely on our own data and try to predict how the consumer will change or what their demands are.
All right. My last question is very exciting. So let me put it there in front of you guys. So what are we going to do in the era of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? So people are talking about it. There's a lot of stuff coming from China. Yeah. So Professor Johnson, what is your take on it?
I think this is a really fun question to speculate about. Earlier on in the conversation, we talked about the continuing relevance of cash payments in Pakistan, for example. That's going against the tide in thinking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Yet on the other hand, we also know that a well implemented Bitcoin system, particularly if it's thought through and backed, is one way of building a trusted payment system. So I have to say I'm a bit of a skeptic. It hasn't worked in many markets. Governments are not particularly keen on cryptocurrencies because they can't control them, and so many of the central banks have been very opposed to the growth of cryptocurrencies. We see these examples popping up as investment vehicles and so on. I'm less comfortable with the idea that we will see immediate changes in emerging markets, particularly affecting, if you like, the B2C end of the business in relation to cryptocurrencies. But I could be proved completely wrong.
Time will tell us, right? Now, though I said this is last question, but I think this particular question is very important, and especially with reference to that this is the month of Ramadan, Eid is coming, and a lot of retailers actually wait for the month of Ramadan and Eid for their sales. So let me bring this question here on the screen. And particularly this question is for Qasim. So Qasim, how do you see this, coming along now?
I mean, it's going to be a big challenge because all retailers had planned inventory according to the Eid season. We're getting a lot of mixed signals from the government. Right now, there's sort of talks that we might actually open up before Eid. But I feel even if we do open up, we were doing scenario plannings, and we feel that even if we do open up, we'll just be able to achieve 30% of our sales as to last year. So that's my sort of forecast for Eid. And because of that, it's a huge challenge, the inventory management.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure our viewers have also enjoyed it. So viewers, this is our regular feature of Tech Talk with Dr. Farah Arif. We'll come back the next Saturday with our new panel and exciting discussion. Have a good day. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.